Remember when your mother could make apple pie without apples, cherry pie without cherries, and desserts that tasted expensive using ingredients that cost pennies?
As it has been ever since they sat down to dinner in high chairs.
Betty Crocker's Depression-era recipe cards held secrets that fooled entire dinner tables and saved family budgets. These 30 forgotten masterpieces prove our mothers were kitchen magicians. Here's how. Ritz mock apple pie. Ever wonder how crackers became America's greatest pie trick? Mama's rolling out pastry dough while a sleeve of Ritz crackers sits waiting on the counter, ready to fool the entire Sunday dinner table with the most convincing performance any snack food ever gave. You crush those buttery rounds into rough chunks, feeling them break apart with that distinctive crumble that somehow transformed into apple-like texture when mixed with the right ingredients. The key was in the preparation. 2 cups of broken crackers got tossed with sugar, cinnamon, cream of tartar, and fresh lemon juice that made everything sing with that tart brightness people expected from real apples. As you stirred, those crackers soaked up the spiced syrup like tiny sponges, turning soft and tender while maintaining just enough texture to convince anyone taking a bite. The smell rising from the oven was pure apple pie heaven, with cinnamon and butter creating an aroma so authentic that neighbors would pause on the sidewalk, wondering who had the money for out-of-season fruit. This wasn't just about saving money during tight times when apples cost more than most families could spare. It was pure kitchen magic that had neighbors begging for the secret recipe that seemed impossible to duplicate. Jello Dream Pie. What happens when gelatin powder meets whipped cream in a pie shell? The icebox door swings open to reveal a wobbling masterpiece that made every 1950s hostess feel like she owned her own soda fountain, complete with the kind of pastel elegance that graced magazine covers and department store lunch counters. You dissolve that jewel-bright Jello in hot water first, watching the crystals disappear like magic, while the kitchen fills with artificial fruit scents that somehow smelled more appealing than real strawberries or lime. The secret was in the timing. You had to let that gelatin mixture cool until it was just beginning to thicken, reaching that perfect consistency where it would fold into whipped cream without deflating those precious air bubbles or creating lumps that would ruin the smooth texture. Then came the magic moment when heavy cream, whipped to soft peaks with just a touch of vanilla and powdered sugar, got folded into that cooling gelatin base until everything turned pale and dreamy like sunset clouds. Black bottom pie. Why did dinner party guests always gasp when they cut into this beauty? The fork slides through pale vanilla custard, then hits a secret layer of rich chocolate lurking at the bottom like buried treasure that transforms every bite into a surprise worth savoring slowly. You start by melting the darkest chocolate you can find with just a touch of butter, stirring constantly over low heat until it becomes glossy and smooth as velvet, ready to paint the foundation of what would become the most impressive dessert in your repertoire. The chocolate layer gets spread carefully across that pre-baked crust, using the back of a spoon to create an even coating that extends all the way to the edges, ensuring every slice would reveal that dramatic contrast that made guests stop mid-conversation. Then comes the vanilla custard, prepared separately with egg yolks, sugar, and real vanilla extract, cooked to perfection until it coats a wooden spoon without a single lump. The key was pouring that custard gently over the chocolate, using a large serving spoon to distribute it evenly without disturbing the dark layer underneath that would create the signature two-toned effect. Vinegar custard pie. Can something so sour create something so sweet? The wooden spoon stirs yellow custard while a tablespoon of white vinegar waits nearby, ready to transform this simple mixture into something that tastes exactly like fresh lemon filling without a single citrus fruit in sight. You whisk eggs with sugar until they're pale and thick, creating a base so rich it coats the spoon like liquid gold, then add that vinegar drop by careful drop while continuing to stir, watching it brighten the whole mixture without curdling even a single bit of the delicate custard. The magic happens slowly as the acid cuts through rich dairy the way fresh lemon juice should. But vinegar cost pennies when citrus fruit was dear as gold and twice as hard to find in rural communities where fresh produce arrived sporadically. The key was in the proportions. Too little vinegar and the custard tasted flat. Too much and the sourness overwhelmed the delicate sweetness that made this pie so appealing to children and adults alike. As it bakes, the vinegar mellows into something sophisticated and complex, creating a filling that fooled taste buds so completely that guests would ask what variety of lemons produced such perfect flavor. This was Depression-era genius disguised as regular weeknight dessert, fooling everyone while stretching grocery budgets that couldn't accommodate expensive imported fruit that came with premium prices. The finished pie looked exactly like traditional lemon custard, with that same pale yellow color and silky texture that made it impossible to detect the substitution until someone revealed the secret ingredient. Mothers served this proudly at church socials and family gatherings, watching faces light up with surprise when they learned the truth about what created that perfect tangy sweetness. Mock cherry pie. How do you make cherry pie when cherries cost a fortune? The kitchen counter holds cranberries and raisins, two humble fruits about to masquerade as something far more expensive in the most convincing performance of their lives. You chop those tart cranberries roughly, letting their ruby juice stain everything pink, then fold in plump raisins that add the sweetness cherries normally provide. A touch of almond extract does the heavy lifting, creating that distinctive cherry flavor that had people swearing they could taste the orchard. The cranberries hold their shape like perfect cherry halves, while the raisins disappear into jammy sweetness that bound everything together. "Better than store-bought," neighbors would declare, never guessing they'd been fooled by fruit that grew in bogs and on vines. Which one disguised vegetables as dessert? Green tomato pie. What do you do when frost threatens the garden but the tomatoes are still green? Those firm green orbs sit on the windowsill, destined for something far sweeter than their vegetable destiny, as clever hands transform them into mock apple filling. You slice them thin like apple wedges, then toss with sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg until they glisten with spice-scented syrup. The tomatoes hold their shape beautifully as they bake, their tartness mellowing into something remarkably apple-like, while their natural pectin thickens the juices. This was end-of-season magic that turned potential waste into Sunday dessert, proving that resourceful cooks could make sweetness from the most unlikely sources. "Waste not, want not," Great Aunt Martha always said, cutting generous slices for anyone brave enough to try. The next surprise came from the cereal aisle. Grape nut custard pie. Who decided breakfast cereal belonged in dessert? The measuring cup fills with those tiny, crunchy grape nuts, while eggs and cream wait to transform them into something that tastes like the world's most sophisticated custard pie. You soak those cereal nuggets in warm milk first, letting them soften just enough to bite through while keeping their distinctive texture. Then comes the custard base. Eggs, sugar, and vanilla whisked until silky smooth, ready to embrace those tender but still chewy bits of cereal. As it bakes, the grape nuts settle into the bottom, creating a naturally textured crust within the custard itself. This was Depression-era brilliance that stretched expensive ingredients while adding nutrition nobody expected in pie. Which one of these takes you back the most? Butterscotch cream pie. Why did brown sugar pie make everyone feel so fancy? The heavy-bottomed saucepan holds butter and brown sugar, bubbling together into liquid gold that would soon become the silkiest filling imaginable. You cook that mixture slowly, stirring constantly as it darkens and deepens, filling the kitchen with the scent of caramelized sweetness that made neighbors pause on the sidewalk. Then comes hot cream, whisked in gradually to prevent lumps, followed by beaten egg yolks that turn everything pale amber and rich as velvet. The finished filling pours like silk into that waiting pie shell, setting up firm enough to slice but soft enough to melt on your tongue. "Rich as a millionaire's breakfast," Daddy would tease, savoring every spoonful of what tasted like pure luxury but cost less than a fancy candy bar. But the real luxury was coming next. Pineapple custard pie. How did tropical fruit end up in Midwest kitchens? The can opener pierces that Del Monte label while chunks of golden pineapple drain in a colander, ready to bring Hawaii to a pie shell without anyone leaving their hometown. You fold those sweet tart pieces into vanilla custard that's been enriched with just enough cream to make everything taste like vacation. The pineapple adds bursts of sunshine flavor and a tender texture that contrasts beautifully with the smooth custard base. This was exotic eating for families who'd never seen a palm tree, making canned fruit feel like a luxury ingredient worthy of company dinner. The natural enzymes in pineapple kept the custard from getting too thick, creating a filling that sliced perfectly but never felt heavy. The next one required real kitchen courage. Vinegar meringue pie. What kind of nerve did it take to put vinegar under fluffy meringue? The egg whites peak perfectly while that tangy custard base waits below, ready to prove that the sourest ingredient in the pantry could create the most convincing lemon pie substitute ever invented. You build the custard slowly, cooking sugar, cornstarch, and water until thick, then whisking in vinegar that transforms everything into bright, lemony filling without a single citrus fruit in sight. The key was the meringue, beaten to stiff, glossy peaks that crowned the pie like fresh snow, hiding the vinegar secret underneath 3 inches of sweetness. This was the pie that saved Sunday dinner when lemons cost more than butter, proving that substitution could taste better than the original. And just when you thought we'd seen it all, the next 10 get even more creative. Prune whip pie. Did anyone actually admit they loved prunes enough to turn them into elegant dessert? The double boiler steams gently while those wrinkled dark fruits soften into velvet smoothness, ready to become the most surprisingly delicious pie filling of the 1940s. The magic happens when you fold that prune base into beaten egg whites, creating a filling light as air but rich as pudding. The natural sweetness of dried fruit meant less sugar needed, while the fiber kept everyone satisfied long after dinner ended. "Elegant enough for the preacher," Mother would say, serving generous wedges to guests who never guessed they were eating health food disguised as indulgence. Grandma Jenkins swore this pie kept her husband regular as clockwork, though she'd never say such things in mixed company. The next one turned oatmeal into pure temptation. Oatmeal pie. How did breakfast cereal become the star of dessert hour? The wooden spoon scrapes against the mixing bowl as rolled oats get folded into a custard base that will fool anyone into thinking they're eating the most expensive pecan pie money can buy. You start with eggs and corn syrup, beating them until thick and golden, then add those humble oats along with butter, vanilla, and just enough brown sugar to make everything taste like liquid cookie dough. The oats soak up all that sweetness while adding the chewy texture that made pecan pie so popular, but at a fraction of the cost. As it bakes, the top turns golden brown and slightly crispy, while the bottom stays soft and custard-like. This was thrift cooking at its finest, turning a 10-cent ingredient into something that tasted like a $1 dessert. "Stick to your ribs good," Papa would declare, loosening his belt after a second helping that proved sometimes the simplest ingredients created the most satisfying results. But nothing was simpler than what came next: sugar cream pie. What happens when you have nothing but pantry staples and Sunday company coming? The pie shell waits empty while sugar, cream, and butter prepare to become the most basic yet sophisticated dessert ever to grace a farmhouse table. You whisk heavy cream with sugar and a pinch of salt, then pour it directly into that unbaked crust, along with dots of butter that will melt into golden pools of richness. The cream sets into silky custard as it bakes, while the butter creates rich pockets of flavor throughout. This was proof that the finest ingredients didn't need fancy preparation, just careful attention and perfect proportions. Simple as Sunday morning, the church ladies would say, though they all guarded their exact measurements like state secrets. The Indiana housewives knew this recipe fed a crowd without breaking the bank, making elegance accessible to every family table. The tropical flavor coming next felt like pure luxury by comparison. Coconut cream cloud pie. How did shredded coconut turn ordinary custard into island paradise? The double boiler bubbles gently, while milk slowly heats with handfuls of sweetened coconut that will infuse every drop with tropical flavor that transported Depression-era kitchens straight to the South Pacific. You toast half the coconut in a dry skillet until golden brown, filling the air with nutty sweetness that makes the whole house smell like vacation. Then comes the custard base. Egg yolks, whisked with sugar and cornstarch until pale yellow, then gradually combined with that coconut-scented hot milk until everything thickens into silk. Smooth as silk and sweet as a dream, the recipe card promised, and every bite delivered on that promise. Martha always said this pie made her feel like she was dining in a fancy hotel instead of her own kitchen, but the next one required real detective work to figure out. Mock pumpkin pie, carrot-based. What kind of kitchen genius figured out that carrots could fool a Thanksgiving table? The pressure cooker releases steam while bright orange carrots cook until fork tender, ready to masquerade as their more expensive autumn cousin in the most convincing performance any root vegetable ever gave. You mash those carrots until completely smooth, then fold in eggs, evaporated milk, and the exact same spices that made pumpkin pie famous: cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and cloves. As it bakes, the filling sets into that familiar orange custard that had guests asking for seconds without ever suspecting the substitution. The next one turned yesterday's mistakes into today's masterpiece: angel food pie. What do you do with leftover angel food cake that's gone slightly stale? Those fluffy white chunks get torn into irregular pieces, ready to become the base for a pie filling that transformed yesterday's dessert into tomorrow's showstopper. You fold the cake pieces gently into vanilla pudding that's been lightened with whipped cream. The cake soaks up all that creamy goodness while maintaining just enough structure to provide interesting texture in every bite. This was Depression-era brilliance disguised as elegant company dessert, proving that nothing edible ever had to go to waste in a resourceful kitchen. Light as heaven and twice as sweet, Aunt Bessie would say, serving generous portions that made everyone forget they were eating leftovers. The church social ladies all swore this pie tasted better than fresh angel food cake, though none of them could explain exactly why. But explaining the next flavor combination was even more difficult: chocolate mint cream pie. Who decided that dinner mints belonged in pie filling? The double boiler melts chocolate slowly while peppermint extract waits nearby, ready to transform simple custard into something that tasted exactly like those fancy after-dinner chocolates nobody could afford to buy regularly. You start with the richest chocolate custard imaginable, cocoa powder whisked into hot milk until completely smooth, then enriched with egg yolks and just enough sugar to balance the natural bitterness. The peppermint comes last, added drop by drop until the flavor brightens but doesn't overwhelm. Dorothy claimed this pie impressed her in-laws so much they finally admitted she could cook, though that might have been the sherry talking. The next one captured sunshine in custard form. Orange chiffon pie. How do you bottle summer sunshine and serve it in a pie shell that transforms ordinary Tuesday dinners into celebrations? The rotary beater whips farm-fresh egg whites to soft, billowing peaks that gleam like fresh snow, while fresh orange juice heats gently in a small saucepan with unflavored gelatin that will set everything into the lightest, airiest filling ever to grace a dessert table where conversation stops mid-sentence when the first bite hits eager taste buds. The preparation requires perfect timing and gentle hands. The gelatin must dissolve completely in the warm orange juice without creating lumps, while the egg whites need to hold their shape without becoming so stiff that they can't be folded properly into the cooling custard base that provides richness and stability to this ethereal creation. You fold the beaten whites into orange-flavored custard base that's been cooled until it barely holds together, using a rubber spatula with motions so gentle they barely disturb the delicate foam that took so much effort to create perfectly. The technique requires patience and confidence. Too much folding deflates those precious air bubbles. Too little leaves streaks of white that ruin the uniform pale orange color that makes this pie so visually appealing when sliced for presentation. The transformation happens gradually as you work, watching separate components blend into unified perfection that somehow maintains the light texture while developing complex flavor that improves with each careful fold of the spatula. The bright citrus flavor wakes up your entire mouth with acidic brightness that cuts through rich dinner flavors, while the chiffon texture melts away like flavored clouds that dissolve on your tongue without leaving heaviness or overwhelming sweetness that might spoil the delicate balance this dessert requires to achieve its reputation as the perfect ending to substantial meals. The secret lay in using fresh orange juice rather than canned or frozen concentrate. Real citrus provided natural oils and complex flavor compounds that artificial substitutes could never replicate, creating depth and authenticity that separated this pie from lesser imitations that disappointed rather than delighted. A ginger snap crust provided the perfect spicy contrast to all that sweet tart orange goodness. Its molasses, dark cookies, ground fine and mixed with just enough butter to hold together while adding warm spice notes that complemented citrus without overwhelming the delicate main flavor. The ginger snaps cost more than graham crackers, but their sophisticated flavor made the extra expense worthwhile for special occasions when presentation and taste both mattered to hosts who wanted their desserts remembered long after dinner ended. This was pure California dreaming made accessible to practical Midwest tables, bringing exotic citrus luxury to places where fresh oranges only appeared at Christmas time, when freight trains carried precious cargo from warm groves to cold climates, where people treasured every drop of sunshine flavor they could capture during long winter months. The golden color looked exactly like captured sunbeams, preserved in edible form, making even dreary February afternoons feel like spring was just around the corner with its promise of warmth, renewal, and fresh beginnings that made winter's hardships seem temporary and manageable. Strawberry glaze pie. What made the first strawberries of spring look like precious jewels arranged on a pie that announced winter's defeat? The heavy saucepan bubbles gently with fresh strawberry juice and cornstarch, while perfect berries wait in neat rows on clean kitchen towels, their red color so vibrant it seemed to glow with internal light, ready to be painted with shining glaze that would make every slice look like magazine photography that belonged in fancy restaurants rather than farmhouse kitchens. The strawberries had to be selected with the critical eye of someone who understood that appearance mattered as much as flavor in this particular creation. Each berry needed to be perfectly shaped, uniformly ripe, and completely unblemished to create the stunning visual impact that made this pie unforgettable to anyone lucky enough to witness its creation and consumption. You arrange those beautiful berries in concentric circles over vanilla custard or cream cheese, filling that had been spread smooth as silk, taking considerable time to place each individual strawberry for maximum visual impact while ensuring that every slice would contain the perfect ratio of fruit to filling. The pattern required mathematical precision and artistic sensibility, starting from the outside edge and working toward the center, each berry positioned to complement its neighbors while creating overall symmetry that pleased the eye before the first bite ever reached eager mouths. Then comes the glaze preparation, a delicate process that transforms simple strawberry juice into liquid jeweler's lacquer, cornstarch whisked into cold juice until completely smooth, then heated gradually while stirring constantly to prevent lumps from forming as the mixture thickens into glossy perfection that coats the spoon like liquid silk. The glaze needs to be hot enough to pour smoothly, but not so hot that it wilts the delicate berries or melts the custard base beneath, requiring careful temperature control and perfect timing that separates experienced bakers from enthusiastic beginners. The finished glaze gets poured carefully over each arranged berry until everything gleams like fresh lacquer applied by skilled craftsmen, creating a protective coating that preserves color and texture while adding sweetness that complements, rather than masks, the natural fruit flavor that makes spring strawberries so precious after months of canned and preserved substitutes. The glaze sets up firm enough to slice cleanly with a sharp knife, but remains soft enough to coat your spoon with every bite, creating textural interest that keeps each forkful engaging and satisfying. This was spring celebration on a plate. Coffee cream pie. Why did coffee flavor make children feel sophisticated and adults feel indulgent? The percolator fills the kitchen with rich coffee aroma, while heavy cream waits to transform strong black coffee into the smoothest, most elegant pie filling ever to grace an adult dinner party where conversation flowed as smoothly as the dessert itself. You start with coffee concentrated enough to wake the dead, 3 times stronger than regular morning brew. Then fold it gradually into custard base that's been enriched with the heaviest cream money could buy, and just enough sugar to balance that natural bitterness without masking the deep roasted flavor that made this dessert so appealing to grown-up palates. The key was using real percolated coffee, not instant powder that dissolved in hot water, but never delivered the complex flavor notes that made this pie worthy of special occasions and dinner parties where impressions mattered more than convenience. The coffee had to cool slightly before joining the custard, preventing the hot liquid from scrambling the delicate egg base that provided richness and body to the finished filling. As it chills overnight in the icebox, the filling sets into silky perfection that cuts clean with a sharp knife, but melts on your tongue like liquid velvet infused with all the sophistication of European coffee houses that most families only read about in magazines. This was after-dinner elegance in pie form, making every meal feel like fine dining, even when served on everyday dishes that came from the five and dime rather than fancy department stores. The grown-ups lingered over coffee pie the way they'd savor good conversation and expensive cigars, making dessert last long into the evening, while children watched from the doorway, hoping for a taste of something that seemed reserved for adults only. The bitter undertones paired beautifully with whipped cream that had been sweetened just enough to provide contrast without overwhelming the coffee's natural intensity, creating a balance that pleased both sophisticated palates and those still learning to appreciate complex flavors. Refined as Sunday service and rich as banker's coffee, Nestle Road pie. What kind of fancy name disguised simple ingredients into something that sounded like European royalty dining in marble palaces? The kitchen counter displays an impressive array, candied fruit glowing like stained glass windows, chopped walnuts still fragrant from recent cracking, and a small bottle of dark rum that would transform ordinary custard into something worthy of the finest dinner parties where social status mattered as much as flavor. You fold those colorful fruit pieces into vanilla custard that's been lightened with whipped cream beaten to soft peaks. Then add just enough rum to make everything taste mysterious and worldly without overwhelming the delicate fruit flavors that provided both sweetness and texture. The candied cherries provide bright red color that catches the light like tiny rubies, while the nuts add satisfying crunch that makes every bite interesting and complex in ways that regular custard could never achieve on its own. The preparation required patience and attention to detail. Each piece of fruit needed to be perfectly distributed throughout the creamy base, creating a mosaic of flavors and textures that made every slice slightly different from the last, while maintaining the elegant appearance that impressed guests before they even tasted the first forkful. This was the pie that made modest housewives feel like continental hostesses who'd traveled the world and dined in sophisticated restaurants, serving something with a foreign name that impressed guests before they even heard the recipe or understood what made it so special. The rum added sophistication that regular vanilla custard could never achieve, though the alcohol content was mild enough to serve to children without causing concern among parents, who might otherwise object to spirits in dessert. Betty Crocker's original recipe promised international cuisine right in your own kitchen, and families who'd never traveled beyond the county line felt like they were dining in Paris or Vienna when they tasted this elegant creation that transformed humble ingredients into something that sounded expensive and exotic. Ethel always served this when the new neighbors came to dinner, wanting to make a good first impression with something that sounded cultured and refined, proving that she was more sophisticated than her small-town address might suggest to people who judged others by their postal codes. The finished pie looked as impressive as it tasted, with those colorful fruit pieces creating an attractive pattern that made every slice look like it belonged in a fancy restaurant rather than a farmhouse kitchen where practicality usually trumped presentation. But the next one brought us back to familiar American flavors with an unexpected twist. Banana cream dream pie. How did tropical fruit become America's favorite comfort food flavor that could soothe any heartache or celebration? The ripest bananas sit on the counter, their peels spotted brown in exactly the way that meant perfect sweetness for slicing into thick coins that would nestle into vanilla custard like golden treasures waiting to be discovered by anyone lucky enough to receive a generous slice. You layer those banana slices with careful precision between thick custard that's been cooked to silky perfection and under clouds of whipped cream that had been beaten until it held soft peaks, creating a dessert that tasted like childhood comfort and grown-up indulgence wrapped together in one perfect package. The bananas release their distinctive perfume into the custard as the pie chills overnight, infusing every component with that unmistakable flavor that made mouths water before the fork even arrived at the table. The natural enzymes in ripe bananas performed a delicate chemical dance with the custard base, keeping it from setting too firm while adding subtle complexity that enhanced rather than competed with the vanilla base that provided richness and body. A vanilla wafer crust provided the perfect foundation with its subtle sweetness and delicate crunch, though many experienced cooks preferred traditional pastry, dough rolled thin and pre-baked until golden brown for special occasions when presentation mattered as much as flavor. This was the pie that made everyone feel loved and cared for, combining familiar flavors into something that tasted like a warm hug from someone's favorite aunt, who always knew exactly what you needed to feel better. The preparation required timing and attention. Bananas had to be perfectly ripe, but not overripe. Custard needed to be completely cooled before assembly, and whipped cream couldn't be added until just before serving to maintain its light texture and prevent it from deflating into disappointment. Lemon fluff pie. What happens when egg whites meet fresh lemon juice in the most delicate dance of sweet and sour that required precision timing and gentle hands? The copper bowl holds beaten whites that gleam like fresh snow on a sunny winter morning, while lemon custard waits nearby to be folded gently into that cloud-like base without deflating even a single precious air bubble that took so much effort to create. You separate those eggs while they're still cold from the icebox, using the old trick of cracking them cleanly and letting the whites fall into the spotless copper bowl that had been wiped with lemon juice to ensure no trace of fat remained to prevent proper whipping. The whites need to come to room temperature for maximum volume when beaten, requiring patience that many modern cooks never learned, but was essential for achieving the ethereal texture that made this pie so special. The lemon curd base demands constant stirring over the lowest possible heat, cooking fresh egg yolks with bright lemon juice and granulated sugar until the mixture thickens enough to coat a wooden spoon without curdling into scrambled disappointment that would ruin hours of careful preparation. The magic moment comes when you fold that tart custard base into those pristine beaten whites, using a motion so gentle it barely disturbs the delicate foam, while gradually incorporating the heavier mixture until everything becomes pale yellow and light as morning clouds. The finished pie sets up slowly in the refrigerator, becoming firm enough to slice cleanly with a sharp knife, but maintaining that ethereal texture that dissolved on your tongue like lemon-flavored snow that left you wanting more with every ethereal spoonful. This was spring cleaning for the palate after heavy winter meals, clearing away rich flavors with bright acidity that made everything else taste better and more vibrant afterward. Date cream pie. Who decided that exotic dried fruit from faraway desert oases deserved its own custard showcase in American farmhouse kitchens? The kitchen scissors snip through sticky dates that clung to the blades like amber honey while cream heats gently on the back burner, preparing to transform those chewy Middle Eastern treasures into sophisticated American dessert that would impress guests who'd never tasted anything more exotic than imported oranges at Christmas time. You chop the dates into small, uniform pieces that would distribute evenly throughout the vanilla custard base, their natural sweetness concentrated by the drying process, requiring less added sugar than most pie fillings, while providing complex flavor notes that seemed almost wine-like in their intensity. The dates had to be fresh enough to cut cleanly, but not so moist that they turned to paste under the pressure of sharp scissors, requiring careful selection at the grocery store, where imported fruits commanded premium prices that made them special occasion ingredients rather than everyday staples. As the dates cook slowly in the warm custard base, they soften gradually while releasing concentrated fruit flavor that paired beautifully with rich dairy products without overwhelming the delicate custard texture that provided the foundation for this elegant dessert. A graham cracker crust complemented the date flavor better than traditional pastry, its honey-sweetened graham flour providing earthy notes that enhanced rather than competed with the fruit's natural complexity, though both worked equally well for different occasions and personal preferences. This was worldly eating for families who'd never seen a palm tree or traveled beyond their home counties, making imported fruit feel accessible and familiar through the comfort of custard and cream that transformed exotic ingredients into something recognizably American. The natural fiber in dates meant this pie satisfied hunger better than most desserts, making it perfect for potluck dinners and church socials where people needed substantial food that would carry them through long afternoons of socializing and community activities. Apple custard pie. Why settle for regular apple pie when you could have apples floating in silk like precious jewels suspended in liquid gold? The sharp paring knife moves in steady, practiced strokes, creating perfect spirals from firm Granny Smith apples that had been selected with the careful eye of someone who understood that not all apples were created equal for serious baking purposes. Each peel curls away in one continuous ribbon, revealing the pale green flesh underneath, while the custard base waits patiently nearby, ready to embrace those tender slices in creamy luxury that would elevate simple orchard fruit to the kind of company dinner elegance that made guests feel genuinely special and appreciated. The preparation ritual itself became a meditation on precision and care. Each apple needed to be peeled completely, cored with mathematical accuracy, then sliced into uniform crescents exactly 1/4 inch thick to ensure perfectly even cooking throughout the entire pie. You arrange those apple slices in neat overlapping rows that create an intricate pattern resembling rose petals or fish scales, taking time to make each layer beautiful, because you know that presentation matters almost as much as flavor when serving something this sophisticated to people whose opinions carry weight in your social circle. The vanilla custard base represents hours of careful preparation, starting with the freshest eggs from hens. You separate each egg with the confidence that comes from years of practice, letting the whites fall cleanly away while preserving every precious drop of yolk that will provide richness and binding power to create the perfect custard consistency. Heavy cream, still cold from the icebox, gets measured precisely, because too little would make the custard thin and disappointing, while too much would make it so rich that guests couldn't finish their portions without feeling overwhelmed by excessive luxury. The sugar dissolves completely into the egg mixture, requiring patient whisking until no trace of grittiness remains and everything becomes smooth as silk thread pulled through careful fingers. The magic happens when you pour that golden custard around and between each carefully arranged apple slice, watching it flow into every crevice and gap until the entire pie filling becomes one harmonious composition of fruit and cream. The custard needs to reach exactly the right level, high enough to partially cover the topmost apple slices, but not so high that it overflows during baking when the heat causes everything to expand slightly. A light dusting of freshly grated nutmeg across the surface provides the final touch that transforms this from simple custard pie into something worthy of special occasions and dinner parties, where every detail receives scrutiny from guests who notice such refinements. The baking process requires careful attention and perfect timing, starting in a hot oven that sets the custard quickly, then reducing the temperature to allow gentle, even cooking that won't curdle the delicate dairy base or overcook the tender apple slices. The apples hold their shape beautifully as they bake, becoming fork-tender but never mushy while releasing natural juices that blend seamlessly with the surrounding custard to create flavor complexity that regular apple pie could never achieve with its simple combination of fruit, spice, and pastry. The custard acts as both cooking medium and flavor enhancer, preventing the apples from browning while adding richness that made every bite feel substantial and satisfying in ways that regular apple pie could never match. This was apple pie's sophisticated city cousin, offering familiar orchard fruit flavor in an unexpected presentation that made ordinary grocery store apples feel special enough for Sunday dinner with the preacher or holiday meals when extended family gathered to share memories and create new traditions. The transformation from humble fruit to elegant dessert proved that technique and creativity could elevate any ingredient when applied with proper understanding and genuine care for the final result. Each slice revealed beautiful apple layers suspended in silky custard like prehistoric insects preserved in amber, creating visual drama that made every portion feel like a work of art worth photographing if cameras had been common in farmhouse kitchens. The flavor combination worked on multiple levels. The natural tartness of green apples provided bright acidity that prevented the rich custard from becoming cloying, while the vanilla and nutmeg added warmth and complexity that made each bite more interesting than simple fruit pie could ever achieve. The texture contrast between tender fruit and smooth custard created interest that kept people coming back for second helpings even when they claimed to be completely satisfied after finishing their first generous portion. Elegant as evening dinner and comforting as morning coffee, Mother would say with obvious pride while serving this masterpiece when she wanted to impress guests without abandoning the familiar flavors that made everyone feel welcome and appreciated. She understood that true hospitality meant finding the perfect balance between impressive presentation and approachable taste, creating dishes that made people feel sophisticated without making them feel intimidated or unwelcome at her family table. The preparation required extra time and attention to detail that separated serious bakers from those who simply followed recipes without understanding the principles behind successful results. Each apple slice needed to be cut uniformly to ensure even cooking throughout the entire pie, while the custard required constant attention during mixing to prevent lumps or curdling that would ruin hours of careful work. The investment of time and effort always paid dividends when guests took their first bite, and their expressions revealed genuine surprise and appreciation for something they'd never experienced before, despite thinking they knew everything about apple-based desserts. But the next one took far less precision and delivered even more satisfaction. Molasses custard pie. How did the darkest sweetener create the richest, most satisfying dessert experience that could transport taste buds to realms of complexity most people never imagined possible from such humble ingredients? The thick molasses pours slowly from the heavy glass jar like liquid amber. Its color so deep and dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, while farm-fresh eggs wait patiently to be transformed into custard. So profound and complex it made regular white sugar seem pale, boring, and completely inadequate by comparison. You whisk that dark syrup into beaten eggs gradually, one careful spoonful at a time, watching it turn everything the rich color of autumn leaves at their peak, while filling the entire kitchen with intoxicating scents of caramel, wood smoke, and mysterious spices that seem to emerge naturally from the molasses itself, without any additional seasoning required. The transformation happens slowly as you stir, creating swirls of golden brown that gradually blend into uniform richness, releasing aromatic compounds that made neighbors pause on their evening walks to identify the source of such appealing fragrances. The finished custard bakes to absolute perfection in a moderate oven, firm enough to slice cleanly with a sharp knife, but soft enough to melt on your tongue with layers of flavor that lingered long after the last bite disappeared, leaving you contemplating the complexity that simple ingredients could achieve when handled with proper respect and technique. This was Depression-era luxury disguised as humble everyday pie, making molasses feel exotic and sophisticated instead of just cheap and practical, proving that the best flavors often came from the most unexpected sources. The robust, almost wine-like flavor paired beautifully with strong black coffee served in delicate china cups, creating an after-dinner combination that satisfied both sweet tooth and grown-up palate while providing the kind of substantial satisfaction that lighter desserts could never match. The iron and essential minerals naturally present in molasses meant this dessert actually provided genuine nutrition along with pure pleasure, though nobody ever mentioned health benefits when praising its rich, complex taste that seemed to improve with each thoughtful bite. "Dark as midnight and rich as a banker's wallet," Uncle Joe would joke while cutting himself generous seconds, though he always managed to finish 2 substantial slices without any help from anyone else at the table. The preparation was nearly foolproof for nervous bakers. Molasses custard was almost impossible to overcook or curdle, making it perfect for those who worried about timing and temperature while building confidence through consistent success. But the next one required split-second timing to achieve its signature look: chocolate pudding pie. What kind of kitchen magic turned a simple box of pudding mix into bakery-quality elegance that could fool anyone into thinking it came from expensive French patisseries? The heavy-bottomed saucepan holds fresh milk that's just beginning to steam, while chocolate pudding powder sits measured and ready, waiting to be whisked into the smoothest, richest filling ever to grace a pre-baked pie shell that had been cooled to room temperature for optimal results. You add the powder gradually, just a tablespoon at a time, whisking constantly with a wire whisk to prevent even the smallest lumps from forming as the mixture thickens into glossy perfection that coats the spoon like liquid silk and releases the pure aroma of quality chocolate that filled the kitchen with promises of satisfaction. The key to success lay in cooking the mixture just long enough to eliminate any starchy taste from the cornstarch base, but not so long that it became too thick to pour smoothly into the waiting crust, requiring careful attention and constant stirring to achieve that perfect consistency that would set up beautifully without becoming rubbery or dense. As it cools slowly on the kitchen counter, the surface forms a light protective skin that actually prevents a tough crust from developing, keeping the texture perfectly smooth and creamy throughout while maintaining that professional appearance that impressed dinner guests and made everyday meals feel special. This was weeknight sophistication that made humble boxed pudding feel like homemade luxury, proving conclusively that careful shortcuts could still produce impressive results when handled with proper technique and genuine care for the final outcome. The chocolate flavor emerged pure and intense, without the grittiness or artificial aftertaste that sometimes plagued homemade custards when inexperienced cooks allowed the temperature to climb too high or rushed the cooking process. Smooth as satin and rich as sin, the package directions promised with characteristic advertising confidence, and careful cooks who followed the instructions precisely could deliver exactly that luxurious experience every single time without fail. Buttermilk chess pie. How did sour milk, that most people considered barely suitable for baking, become the secret ingredient in the silkiest, most elegant custard ever to emerge from American ovens? The thick glass measuring cup holds cultured buttermilk with its distinctive tang and rich texture, while farm-fresh eggs and pure granulated sugar wait patiently to be transformed into filling so smooth and sophisticated it made regular vanilla custard seem ordinary and predictable by comparison. You whisk the buttermilk into beaten eggs gradually, incorporating it slowly to prevent curdling, while watching it create a mixture that looked deceptively simple but would become something absolutely extraordinary through the magic of proper baking technique and time-tested proportions. The tangy buttermilk provided natural acidity that balanced the sweetness perfectly while creating the most tender custard texture imaginable, firm enough to slice into perfect wedges, but soft enough to dissolve on your tongue like flavored cream that had been infused with subtle complexity. A careful touch of pure vanilla extract and the tiniest pinch of freshly grated nutmeg completed the flavor profile without overwhelming or competing with that distinctive buttermilk tang that made every bite interesting and memorable in ways that regular custard could never achieve. This was Southern elegance disguised as humble farmhouse pie, transforming leftover buttermilk from pancake making into a luxury ingredient worthy of the finest dinner parties where appearance and sophistication mattered as much as flavor. The chess pie tradition meant this substantial dessert could sit safely on the kitchen counter for hours without spoiling or losing its perfect texture, making it ideal for church socials and community gatherings where refrigeration wasn't always available, but impressive desserts were always expected. The custard's natural acidity and proper egg content created a stable filling that actually improved with time, developing deeper flavors as it sat at room temperature. Tangy as spring water and smooth as Sunday silk, Granny would declare with obvious pride while cutting generous wedges that somehow never seemed too rich despite the substantial custard base that provided satisfying substance along with elegant flavor. Orange Cream Dream Pie. What happened when fresh orange juice met carefully whipped cream in the most heavenly combination ever invented by creative American cooks? The electric mixer whips heavy cream to soft, billowing peaks, while fresh orange juice waits nearby to be folded into that cloud-like base, creating a filling so light and bright it seemed to capture pure sunshine itself and preserve it in edible form. You add the orange juice gradually, just a tablespoon at a time, folding gently with a rubber spatula to maintain all those precious air bubbles that took so much effort to create and made the texture so ethereal and perfect that it practically floated off the spoon. The natural acidity in fresh citrus helped the whipped cream hold its delicate shape while providing bright, clean flavor that was simultaneously familiar and exotic, making every bite taste like summer morning in California citrus groves that most Midwest families would never see except in magazine photographs. The preparation required perfect timing and gentle technique. Too much folding would deflate the cream, too little would leave streaks of orange that ruined the uniform pale color that made this pie so visually appealing when sliced for presentation. A vanilla wafer crust provided subtle sweetness and delicate crunch that didn't compete with the bright orange flavor, though some experienced cooks preferred graham crackers for their hint of honey taste that complemented citrus beautifully while adding textural interest that made each bite more complex. This was California dreaming, made accessible to practical Midwest kitchens, bringing exotic citrus luxury to places where fresh oranges were still considered special occasion fruit that appeared mainly during winter holidays when prices dropped enough for average families to afford such treats. The pale orange color looked like dawn breaking over fresh snow, making even dreary winter dinners feel like spring celebrations that promised warmer weather and fresh beginnings were just around the corner. Bright as morning sunshine and light as a summer breeze, the handwritten recipe card promised in faded ink, and every spoonful delivered exactly that experience while dissolving on your tongue like flavored air that left you refreshed rather than heavy. The filling had to be served within hours of preparation. The natural enzymes in fresh citrus would eventually break down the delicate vinegar raisin pie. How did the sourest ingredient in any well-stocked pantry create the most perfectly balanced sweet and tart dessert experience that challenged everything people thought they knew about flavor combinations? The wooden spoon stirs plump raisins in a heavy saucepan, while white vinegar waits nearby like a secret weapon, ready to transform those wrinkled fruits into fillings so complex and satisfying it made expensive imported ingredients seem unnecessary and completely boring by comparison. You simmer the raisins slowly until they release their concentrated natural sweetness and plump up like tiny grapes. Then add vinegar, drop by careful drop, tasting constantly until the flavor brightens and becomes more interesting without becoming harsh or overwhelming the delicate fruit flavors that provided the foundation for this unusual creation. The acid cuts through natural fruit sugar with surgical precision, creating a taste sensation that was simultaneously familiar and surprising with every single thoughtful bite. proving that the most unlikely combinations often produced the most memorable results when handled with proper skill and understanding. A careful touch of ground cinnamon and the smallest possible pinch of whole cloves completed the complex flavor profile, making everything taste like the most sophisticated spiced fruit dessert ever created from humble pantry staples that cost pennies rather than dollars. This was Depression-era genius disguised as elegant company pie, proving conclusively that genuine creativity could triumph over expensive ingredients when necessity demanded innovation and resourceful cooks refused to accept limitations. The raisins provided natural sweetness and satisfying chewy texture, while the vinegar added layers of complexity that made each bite more interesting than the last, creating a dessert that improved with contemplation rather than becoming boring through repetition. "Sweet enough for children and sophisticated enough for adults," Mother would explain with obvious satisfaction while serving generous portions that somehow pleased every generation around the Sunday dinner table, from grandparents who appreciated complex flavors to grandchildren who simply knew it tasted good. The combination seemed absolutely impossible until you actually tasted it, then became completely logical and absolutely irresistible, leaving you wondering why nobody had thought of it before. This final pie proved beyond any doubt that American ingenuity could transform even the most unlikely ingredients into desserts worthy of the finest tables, carrying families through hard times with sweetness, creativity, and love baked into every single satisfying bite. These forgotten Betty Crocker masterpieces carried families through decades when creativity mattered more than expensive ingredients. Each recipe tells a story of American ingenuity, proving that love and resourcefulness could create magic in any kitchen. Which one brings back the sweetest memories? Share your favorites so these treasures never fade away.